All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good afternoon, very good day, everyone. Thank you once again to all participants, those who join our sessions today, either through our Zoom platforms and also our DPPC Facebook. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to webinar, and we brought to you special guest today, and it's my friends, Dr. Irwan Meilano from ITB. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Irwan. Thank you for joining us from Indonesia. And it's a very exciting session indeed, as a result of a series of discussion in the past. And I still remember that we met, say, when was it? November, December 2019, right before the pandemic hit Malaysia. At that time, we were lucky enough to discuss some of the progress, from the research perspective and also future research. So interestingly, today, Dr. Irwan with us, together with our Masters of Disaster Risk Management MDRM students, fifth batch. And a little bit about this MDRM, Dr. Irwan, and the rest of our participants on board in Facebook, that the MDRM is postgraduate students dedicated for a program dedicated for the mid-career professional in the field of disaster risk management. So we offer these programs as a one-year top course, and say this batch, this fifth year batch, we have about more than 20 students, and some of them are taking elective courses in the second semester. So today is part of the module embedded into the program, MDRM programs, so-called Geohazard Information for Disaster Risk Assessment. So we had two series of lecture from Professor Masahiro Chigira from Japan, Kyoto, and this week we had a two series already, a lecture by our sensei from Scuba, Professor Dr. Naoki Sakai from Nien. So technically we have this Japanese style of education in UTM, supposed to be in the last 4 years. They travel to Kuala Lumpur and deliver the teaching. But unfortunately, this year we conduct the program through a webinar or virtual platforms. But like it or not, we have to accept these new norms. Yeah. So I think all of us are exciting and waiting for the speech. And I'm happy today that Dr. Irwan will be talking, or at least sharing with us 20 years of reflections, I will say, sharing some of the experience from the field. Yeah, there's something interesting, and also how we can advance the technology and innovation into our understanding our problems, issues related to the earthquakes, seismic related, or cascading geohazard induced by this, I think, the most fatal natural hazard in the world. So I think that's number one. And number two, I would like to inform that we have two set of communication. One, those in the Zoom platforms, you can use the chat box, and I encourage you to introduce yourself and specific for that particular questions. If you refer to particular slides or presentations by Dr. Irwan, or you can also use a Facebook chat, Facebook comment. Put your questions, your recommendations, maybe some remarks that require a further clarification or discussion. So we have 2 hours solid session, and I hope by 3 o'clock Malaysian time we can finish by 5 o'clock. And we happy today to once again welcome our invited speaker, Dr. Irwan Meilano. He's associate professor attached to Faculty of Earth Sciences and Technology, Institut Teknologi Bandung, and also Center for Earthquake Science and Technology. Something new to me, Dr. Irwan, and I hope that Disaster Preparedness Prevention Center, DPPC, can have strong collaborations with the CEST, CEST, hopefully, given the fact that back to 2015, we had this 100 years return of earthquakes at the Mount Kinabalu, and it drew a lot of cascading geohazard, debris flow, landslide, flooding later on. And in fact, the impact, you can feel it until now. Some of the district, say for example, Kota Belud, are still suffering from the sediment-related disaster from this Mount Kinabalu as a result of the shaking and rockfall, debris flow. These kind of geological hazards keep on attacking, or at least the impact we can feeling it, and coming back this Kota Belud is as a rice bowl of Sabah. You can imagine the impact is not just direct impact to the society, economic, and environment, but also to our food security. So you see that just a 30-second of checking on 5th of June 2015 that resulted with about 2.84 billion USD worth of economic losses. You can imagine the impact, direct and indirect impact. So let's hear a story from Indonesia. I believe we have a right people, right time, and right moment to reflect what happening in Indonesia, how we can learn from there, and realign some of our strategies to support the global and regional agenda. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our distinguished guest today, Dr. Irwan. I give you a floor. Dr. Irwan, over to you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Very good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Kamaru, for the invitations. I'm very delighted to meet all of you today. It's my pleasure to be here and share the experience Indonesia, the 20 years experience based on my 20 years field observations during every big earthquakes in Indonesia. I really hope that today discussion will bring you a new insight about what happens in Indonesia, and with the hope that the insight will become a new beginning for our collaborations. Because having so many friends during disaster is very important. Disaster always bring a new idea, a new, beside the problems, of course, but it will bring us a new hope, a new opportunity for research, for collaborations, and for friendships. As I mentioned earlier by Dr. Kamaru, I belong to Faculty of Earth Sciences and Technology. The bad news, maybe, I will share you the bad news. The bad news is since last year, I appointed as a dean of this faculty. And as a dean, so I have additional obligations, not only doing research, but also administrative obligation. So maybe I will have less time for to go for the field work in the futures. But maybe a good news is maybe then we may have our collaboration stronger between our center, our faculty, with your graduate school. So I really hope that in the future we will have more and more collaborations. And also I would like to introduce a new center that established at ITB since 2018. The name of the center is Center for Earthquake Science and Technology. So this is a national center. So Ministry of Education appointed ITB as a center of excellence for the earthquakes. And for the tsunami, Center of Excellence is Shah Kuala University, located in the north of Sumatra. But for the earthquakes, ITB appointed by the Ministry of Education as a Center of Excellence for the earthquake research. So all the earthquake-related research is our duty. So if earthquake happens, so it's our duty to go for the field works and collect some data and of course publish papers and so on and so on. So I think that's a good side of having centers that dedicated our research topics to the earthquakes. So our centers is a center who published the national seismic hazard map together, of course, with others centers. So the national seismic hazard map, the Indonesian national seismic hazard map, basically is a work done by scientists from our centers. So and I will try to share our experience how to establish this national seismic hazard maps. And as mentioned by Dr. Kamaru, in between his busy time, I'm very happy that he accepted my visits to come to his center. So I'm very impressed to see the buildings, the facility, the students, the lecturers, the professors, the Malaysia Japan International Institute of Technology. So I really hope that after this pandemics, I can visit again your centers. And also this photo was taken December 2009. So and so I'm still remembers we have a very good discussion at the time. So I'm really hope that hopefully next year's or the end of this year's I will have time to visit your center again, or maybe you can come to Bandung and we may have a more detailed discussion and continue our collaborations. So for today's discussion, basically I have 4 different topics that I would like to share with all of you. The first one is shares a story of 2 big earthquakes that occurred for the last 3 years in Indonesia, the Lombok earthquakes and the Palu earthquakes, and what lesson that we can learn from those 2 big earthquakes. Maybe the scale of the earthquakes is different with the earthquakes that happens in any other places. But I really hope that you may gain some insight, learn something from our experience. And the second topic is about seismic hazard map of Indonesia. And the third topics I'm going to explain in detail about the Palu earthquakes. And the last topics is I really hope to hear any ideas, any comments, any new perspective about how to build South Asian region as earthquake resilience region. So I really hope on the last part of my discussions, I really hope to hear any comments, suggestions from all the students. Okay, let me start my first part. All the talks, basically all all the part of my presentation today has been published into 2 books. The first book is in Bahasa Indonesia, Pembelajaran Penanganan Darurat Bencana Gempa Bumi Lombok. This book was published by USAID, and this is also supported by National Disaster Management Agency of Indonesia. A few days after the earthquakes, a few days after the Lombok earthquakes, we went to Lombok and we do seismic observations, GPS observations, but also we investigate the response process, and we see any problems during the response and also during the recovery. And we put everything, our knowledge, into this book. So to whom who are interested in learning about Lombok earthquakes, so I will share the PDF file of this book, but unfortunately this book is written in Bahasa Indonesia. And the second book is, this book is published together with Professor Phil Cummins from ENU. So this book published in Geological Society of London. And the title of this book is Geohazard Indonesia, Earth Science for Disaster Risk Reductions. And so it's so many authors contribute in these books from Indonesia and from other countries. Okay, let me start with the first part of my talk, recent earthquake in Indonesia. But before explaining in detail about the recent earthquakes in Indonesia, let me remind you about the 2004 earthquakes. These earthquakes is so important for Indonesia, and also this earthquake is very important for me personally, because some of my best friends passed away due to the tsunami. Many of my friends who live 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers away from the coastline also hit by the tsunami. This is very important events for the Indonesian scientists. And also personally for me, the earthquakes occurred on 26th of December 2004, Saturday. I think Saturday morning. At the time I was a doctoral student in Nagoya, second years of doctoral students in Nagoya University in Japan. And as a doctoral student, so my duty is at the time I had to come to campus, to university frequently to check the seismographs. So that's the duty of graduate students. So I had to check the seismometers and change the papers. Of course, we have a digital type, but for education purposes, we still use also the analog type, the papers type for the seismograph. So when I arrived to campus at that time, so I see a very strange earthquakes happens. The earthquakes that I never seen during my graduate student period. So it's very strange earthquakes because the seismic wave is so obvious, so obvious that it seems that the wave comes to my campus, to Nagoya University, once and maybe travel around the globe and detected again for the second times, and also go around the earth and detected again. So it's at least 3 times these earthquakes appears in our seismograph. It's very strange one. And I discussed with my friends and my lecturer, my sensei at the time, what is the possible cause of these earthquakes, and all of us couldn't understand why we have such kind of waveform at the time. And then probably 12 hours or maybe almost 24 hours after that, for the first time we hear the news from global network that a big earthquake hit the Indonesia. So, and then when I went to Japan in 2000, I wish that I want to be a volcanologist. So since I was born very near to the volcano, my hometown is very close to the volcano. So I always want to be the volcanologist. But after this earthquake, I told my sensei, I want to change my topics. Not volcano anymore, but I want to study earthquakes because earthquake is very important. And then he said, how come you want to change your topics? Because you already the second years of doctoral degree. So I said, let's find a way, sensei, but I want to change my topic. So if you Googling my publications during my early periods as researchers, most of my papers related with the volcano. And when I was in Japan, so every winters and every autumn, so we went for the field work in the one of the volcano 200 kilometers from Tokyo, a small island, small volcanic islands, Miyakejima volcano. So that's my research area. And I've been doing such a field survey for the last 4 years, and suddenly I want to change my topic. So it's come to very surprising even for me at the time. But now I find out that that's a very good decision. So since that period, I dedicated myself to study more about the earthquakes. So this satellite images shows on the left side. I think most of you have seen these slide images before. The one on the left side is the data obtained by Icono satellites almost 2 years before the events on January 10th, 2003. And the second one is the area, is the same area, but obtained 3 days after the tsunami, 3 days after the earthquakes, 29th of December. And you can see that many houses, 100% damages destroyed by the power of the tsunami. So I told my friends and my sensei at the time, let's go to Aceh, let's do a field survey, and unfortunately I have a very supported supervisor at the time, Professor Kimata. He said, okay, Irwan, let's find a way to do a field survey in Aceh. So he managed to collect some funding, and finally last year we can do a field survey. I think February 2005, for the first time we can visit Aceh. If you are aware, in Aceh at the time, Aceh is a conflict area between local separatists with the Indonesian government. So it's very unsafe regions in terms of the political condition. And then frequently I was asked by, when I visit Aceh, frequently I was asked by the Indonesian military and also by the separatists. But I believe that what I'm going to do in Aceh is a for good thing. So even if I captured by the separatists, so I give an explanations what we are going to do, and unfortunately finally they support us. And I think this main route is the one that also, if you can see, I'm not sure if you can. I think I have internet connections. Dr. Kamaru, can you hear my voice?
Yes, that's
okay,
pretty
still
clear.
okay.
Please proceed.
Yes, yes. This is the road that I visited. Actually, I came to Aceh after the earthquakes, maybe 3 times in a year. So this is the area heavily damaged by the earthquakes, and it's very hard to access actually. So it's the easiest way to go to Aceh is direct flight from Jakarta to Aceh. But at the time it's very hard. Then we changed our flights from Kuala Lumpur to Medan, and from Medan we choose the road along the west coast of Sumatra, which is very difficult. And finally, on December 25, we can reach this area, the Calang area. I think this area used to be madrasah. Madrasah Ibtidayah. Madrasah means the Islamic school for elementary Islamic school. And this madrasah is located along this main road. So this madrasah also destroyed by the power of the tsunami. And then we put our GPS observation here. So we have, as you may see, if you are familiar with the GPS observation, GPS receivers, you can see this is our benchmark. So we resurvey this benchmark almost 3 times in a year to observe the co-seismic deformations, and we try to explain why we have such a huge tsunami higher than 20 meters. And then and we successfully collect a very good data set, and we publish a paper, and I'm very I'm very fortunate to finish my degree on time. So I finished my PhD in 2006, and then by using this data set. So and this earthquake is very important, not only for Indonesia, but for most of the earthquake scientists in the world. So because since this, so after the earthquake, many a new concept about the seismotectonic process related with the recurrence interval of the earthquakes has to be revised. Because after the earthquakes, we gain a new understanding about the age of the subduction zone related with the potentials of the big earthquakes. So as I mentioned earlier, earthquakes brings us a many bad story, but also it also brings us a new hopes, a new findings. Okay, I'd like to delete my, okay, let me how to do that. So I think it's, okay. Oh, okay, this one. Okay, let me continue with the next slide. This graph shows the number of disaster in Indonesia that I collected since 2000s until 2016. The y-axis shows the numbers of disasters. So it's not only disasters. This is only disaster that affected that caused economic loss, and some of them also killed many people. And so basically in Indonesia, the number one disaster, according to this data, the most frequent disaster is extreme weathers. And then the second one is flood. So flood is very serious problems now in most of the big cities in Indonesia, including Bandung and also Jakarta. So we have more than 4,000 floods for the last 16 years. And so in terms of the frequency, the highest frequency is extreme weathers. The second one is flood, and the third one is the landslide. And after that, followed by drought, forest fires. Forest fire is very interesting. And no, I mean, forest fire, not interesting, it's very important. Forest fire is something that we never seen such kind of disasters, not until 2000. So we don't have any forest fire before 2000. So this is a new kind of disasters. And I frequently mention to Indonesian governments, if we don't put serious attention to forest fires, the forest fires probably will become the major sources of the economic loss due to disaster in the future. So we need to put a very serious attention into forest fires. We don't have any forest fires before 2000, but now we have very frequent forest fire, especially in Sumatra and Kalimantan. And after that, the earthquakes. So earthquakes is not the most frequent disaster in Indonesia. And after that, followed by the abrasions and volcano eruptions and tsunami. So in terms of the frequency, tsunami comes as a numbers 1, 2, 3, and be number 9. So it's not a kind of it's not a very frequent disasters in Indonesia. But in terms of the economic losses, in terms of direct economic losses, so the number ones, the main cause of economic losses due to disaster in Indonesia, the number one is the earthquakes. And the second one is the forest fire. So I'm very concerned with this one, the forest fire. The forest fire is very serious problems in Indonesia recently. And after that, followed by flood, and tsunami is the number 4. So basically, based on the data that I collected for the last 16 years, Indonesian governments needs to spend more than 1.6 billion US dollars annually due to disasters. So it's very serious problem for a country like Indonesia. 1.6 billion US dollars every year needs to spend to respond to disaster. This is the direct loss. So if we calculate the indirect loss, maybe the numbers will be double, probably triple. So having a good approach for disaster risk reductions, disasters management for risk reductions for a country like Indonesia is very important. And the disaster, especially earthquake, is not only the problem for Indonesia, but some Asian countries also experience similar disaster with Indonesia. For example, in 2013, 93 people killed by Visayas earthquakes in Philippines. And in 2015, maybe you still remember, the Nepal earthquakes killed more than 2,500 people killed by these earthquakes. And also Kinabalu earthquake, this one also mentioned by Dr. Kamaru. I think the numbers may be more, I think the number of victims may be more than 16, yeah, I think. So having a good understanding of the earthquake sources in Southeast Asia is very important. This is the figure showing the tsunamis in Southeast Asian countries. So basically, we have a very serious tsunamis, not only along the west coast of Sumatra, but on the south coast of Java and the eastern part of Indonesia, and also Philippines area, including the Mindoro tsunami in 1994, Panay tsunami 1948, and Mindanao tsunami in 1918. And according to the, if we do the tsunami modelings, then we can see that Mindanao tsunami also affected the area along the north coast of Sulawesi and also the east coast of Sabah and Sarawak area of the Malaysia. So I think having a good understanding of the earthquakes, the source of earthquakes and tsunami is very important for the South Asian countries. So as a scientist, the lesson that we can learn from the past events, from the past earthquakes and the tsunami, the first one is we need to have a better understanding of the earthquake sources. I think the first steps for the earthquake risk reductions or the disaster mitigations is understanding the source. I think it will be incomplete if we just do the mitigations measures without a very good understanding of the sources. So I think we need to start with very good definitions of the earthquake sources, and there's a kind of collaborations between among the scientists, not only the earth scientists, but also the engineers and also the social scientists and also the managements. I think it's very important. So the programs that now managed by Dr. Kamaru, the multidisciplinary approach for disaster risk reduction, is a very good examples of having various point of view try to solve one big problems, disaster reduction. I think this this kind of program is very important. Okay, let me continue to the next slides. So when we calculate the seismic hazard, we need to calculate in a probabilistic ways. Why probabilistic? Because we need to include as many sources as possible. And having so many sources, so we have a different written period of each sources, because each source has its own characteristic, has its own geometry, and also the slip rates, written period, and so on. So we need to combine all the uncertainty of the sources into the probabilistic approach of calculating seismic hazard. But all the process needs to start with the good informations on the earthquake sources. And I think this is one of the big problems with the lesson that I learned from the 2004 tsunami in Aceh. Before the tsunami, we don't have any information about the sources of the tsunami. We don't have any clues about the possible earthquakes that may occur very near the coastline of the Aceh. We don't have any guidelines for the building codes and also the tsunami evacuation map and so on. So I think that's very important lessons that we learned from the 2004 earthquake and tsunami that happens in Aceh. And from that period, so in Indonesia, we try to complete all the data related with the earthquake sources in our country. And I'd like to share our experience in divining when we divine the earthquake source in the eastern part of Indonesia. So I will try to share the story of two big earthquakes, the Lombok earthquakes and the Palu earthquakes. This plot shows the recent earthquakes in the eastern Indonesia for the last 3 years, and I think I think this dot shows the locations of the earthquakes with magnitude bigger than 6. So you can see for the last 3 earthquakes, we have several earthquakes with magnitude bigger than 6. The first earthquakes is in August 2018. We have the Lombok earthquakes. with magnitude 6.9, and more than 500 people killed by these earthquakes. And this earthquakes is very strange. I will explain why this earthquakes is very strange and also very important. I will explain in detail about these earthquakes. And these earthquakes was followed by the September earthquakes, the Palu earthquakes with magnitude 7.4. And these earthquakes also produce more than 10-meter tsunamis. And after that, we have the September 2009 6.5 Ambon earthquakes. And I'm very happy to share with you that our paper just accepted into the SRL journal, Seismological Research Letters, this morning. So I'm very happy to share with you that our paper just accepted at SRL. And if you need the papers about the Ambon earthquake, I'm very happy to share our papers. And this Ambon earthquake followed by Majene earthquakes, January 2021, and more than 105 people killed by these earthquakes. So the total numbers of casualties is 2,823, and economic loss is 1.8 billion, I think 1.8 billion US dollars. This is for the last 3 years. And then if we compare the last 3 years data with historical earthquakes, I think this last year is not correct. I need to revise the slides. I already collected historical earthquakes in these regions. For example, in 1815s in the north of Bali, it's about 200 years ago, an earthquake with magnitude 7 hit this area, and according to the historical data, more than 10,000 people killed by the tsunami, by the earthquake and the tsunami in the northern part of Bali. We have another earthquakes, for example, magnitude 8 in 1674, and in the south of Ambon, and more than 2,000 people killed by this earthquake and tsunami. And also 1938, another earthquake hit eastern part of Ambon, and together with the ANU, we published papers, and the papers appear in the Journal of Science. And it's very interesting that the source of the tsunami is a normal type earthquakes, not the thrust type earthquakes, but the normal type earthquakes that induce the landslides. And then these earthquakes produce significant tsunami that kill many people along the south coast of Ambon's area. So historically, we have a lot of earthquakes and tsunami in the eastern part of Indonesia. And I will share the information about the Lombok earthquakes. And this earthquake is very important for the disasters mitigations, because the first earthquakes occur on 28th of July with magnitude 6.4. And then a few days after the earthquake, we sent our students to go for the field work. We bring the GPS instruments to detect the post-seismic of the earthquakes. And then according to the BMKG, the Indonesian Bureau for Meteorology, Geophysics, and Climatology, they told the local people, don't panic, because the earthquake will be followed by smaller magnitude of the earthquakes. The 6.4 will be followed by several earthquakes with magnitude 5 as an aftershocks. So the Indonesian governments, the BMKG, try to avoid any confusions among local communities and local governments by telling them that don't worry, don't panic, because the earthquakes will be followed by smaller magnitude of the earthquakes. But unfortunately, a week after this earthquake followed by magnitude 6.9. So the aftershock actually bigger than main shocks. So actually the first earthquake is not the main shock. The first earthquake is the foreshocks. The question is, how come we know that these earthquakes are foreshocks and will be followed by the main shocks, which is magnitude bigger than 6.4? So that's a kind of question. It's very hard to answer at the time. And then so the local governments and the local people begin to questioning the decisions made by the BMKG, the Indonesian Bureau for Meteorology and Geophysics, because the earthquakes after the main shocks has a magnitude bigger than the first earthquakes. And that earthquakes followed by another earthquakes 5.9, and after that followed by 6.3, and finally we have another 6.9 earthquakes. So it's very hard to understand, and it's caused a very serious social problems among people who stay in the evacuations area. So you can imagine. So I personally went and had a discussion with them. They said that it was very traumatic experience when they felt a very strong shaking. They always run away, and it's very difficult for them. And then 43,000 people displaced from their home, and they need to move to the evacuations area. And soon after the earthquakes, we process the INSAR data. So we found, we modeled the source of the earthquakes, and we found this. The source of the earthquakes is located beneath the coastlines of the northern part of Lombok. And also we did a processing for the second source of the earthquakes, and according to the field survey made our team, we found an uplift area and subsidence area, and also we did a modeling from the third earthquakes, and we finally come up with the source models of the earthquakes. And this red square shows the source of the earthquakes. This is the Lombok Islands, so it's a cross sections of the islands. So we may explain why we have a series of earthquakes, and we finally come up with the idea of the earthquake conversations or earthquake triggerings. So the first earthquake triggered the second earthquakes, the second earthquake triggered the third earthquakes, and all the first, the second, and third earthquakes triggered the fourth earthquake. So it's very uncommon triggering processes, but I think that's the things that happens in Lombok during the 2004 earthquakes. And then and the bad news about this earthquake is when we did serious research for these earthquakes, when we sent most of our students, our lecturers, and our scientists to do a field survey, try to understand what was going on in Lombok, another earthquake happens, the Palu earthquakes, September 2018. And then the Geological Agency of Indonesia requested us, please help us, let's do a survey in Palu. And I said to them, I'm very sorry, now most of our teams, they are in Lombok, so we cannot do anything about the Palu. But they said that this is very serious and very important earthquakes. and tsunami with the scale larger than Lombok, and we decided to divide our team. Half of our team needs to go to Palu, and during that period, so I clearly understand having so many friends is very important. So we need the help from other countries to do the research. There are so many questions that I cannot answer after the Lombok earthquakes. When I did the survey in Lombok, I made an interview with the local people, and then he asked me a very simple questions. The question is, why nobody ever told us that our region is prone to earthquakes? I've been stay in Lombok for whole my lifetime since I was born. She said, more than almost 50 years, and nobody told us that our area is prone to earthquakes. And the bad news is, when I did my discussion with the local government also asked the same questions. So the one who responsible with the people, actually they don't know anything about the area. So I think the message is, Lombok earthquakes is almost 14 years after the Aceh earthquakes. So I think the same disaster, maybe with different scale, that already happened, that already occurred in Aceh, with a different scale also happened in Lombok. I think many people don't learn anything about the lessons in Aceh. So I think that's some things that Dr. Kamaru understand very well. Our campus, ITB, is a very small campus compared to UTM. We are very small university. Our area is only 30 hectares. It's very small, and the numbers of lecturers is very small. So, and then our capacity is very limited. So we need to go from one place to another places, try to understand the sources of the earthquakes. And also we have difficulties because most of us are scientists, the hard scientists, earth scientists, engineers. The name of the campus is Institut Teknologi Bandung. So we don't have any social scientists. Of course, we have very few of them. We don't have medicals, faculty of medical. We don't have faculty of medicals. We don't have faculty of economics. We have a faculty of business, but we don't have economics. We don't have historians, sociologists. So we need this kind of collaborations among many disciplines, among many countries. So I think it's very important. So I try to have collaboration as many as possible with the local universities and also with other universities. So I hope in the futures that maybe some areas may become what's so called as a research area, or I'm very happy to guide you to go for the field works, and so you may have the first-hand experience. I always encourage my students go to the field after the disaster. It is very important. Seeing by our eyes is different compared by hearing from other people's stories. So going for the field work is very important, and I really hope that sometimes in the future I may invite Dr. Kamaru to come to Indonesia and having field works together with me. Okay, let me move to the second topics, or maybe let me stop for a while so I can drink a cup of tea for a while reading. If there is any questions, okay.
Yeah.
Is it okay, Dr. Kamaru? So I try to read.
That's okay, totally okay. Indeed, there are long list of questions already. Maybe you can just pick it up some of them while while having a short a break, maybe you can also address some of the questions by our colleague here. Well, this excellent presentation. I wish to hear more. Please, Dr. Irwan.
Okay. Now I'm drinking my tea, and I realized that this is a mug from UTM. So I mean, I don't know. Can you see this one? Oh, this is a mug
Yeah.
from UTM.
Okay.
And with my name on it. So it's very kind of.
Thank you.
Okay. The first questions from Bapak Imran from Mercy, Malaysia. When we talk about HAZE, Asian Transboundary HAZE Agreement has highlighted the integrated actions and commitment by ASEAN countries. My question, what can be done by the non-actors such as NGO, UN, AHA Center, and other disaster agency can have children and families in disaster in regards to earthquake disaster? Okay, I think this is very important issues. Yeah, well, to have children and families in Indonesia in regard to disaster. Well, I will explain later on about my what's so-called a social survey. It is not a social survey actually, as I put and I explained that I'm not a social scientist. Basically, I'm the earth scientist, but I have interested in the topics of social related topics of disaster. So I will explain about my social survey later on, but maybe I can give you a short answer for this time. That of course NGO plays very important roles for disaster risk reduction, especially for increasing the resilience. I will explain later on that the knowledge about disaster is very low among students in Indonesia. I will explain. I did a very simple survey by asking many students about the earthquakes in Palu. Palu is a very earthquake prone area, of course, and I asked them I asked them a very simple questions. Have you ever learned about the earthquakes before the Palu earthquakes? And most of them said, no, we don't have any information about the earthquakes and so on. So I think one of the important rules from the NGO or the UNs before the earthquakes is increasing. We really hope that they may help us in increasing the knowledge of the earthquakes. And there's some things that me as a scientist cannot do very well. I mean, for me, it's very hard to explain about the earthquakes to elementary students, even to high school students, even to the teachers. I'm very happy and confident to talk about the earthquakes to Dr. Kamaru and all these master students. But explaining the earthquakes to the young generations is very difficult, extremely difficult for me. I'm not a good earthquakes communicators. It's very hard, even to the local governments. I have a very bad experience when I did my research in Bandung, my hometown, and in the north part of Bandung, we have what we call as a Lembang fault, a very active fault. And in 2012, I think, I published a papers about this fault. And these papers become an attention of the local medias. And they asked me, Dr. Irwan, do you think Lembang fault is a very dangerous fault? And I said, yes, Lembang fault is a dangerous. And a few days afterwards, it's become headlines of the newspapers. An expert of ITB said Bandung is very dangerous. And after that, I never want to be interviewed by the newspapers, because that's not the story that I like to share. Maybe the way I convey the story is not a good enough, because maybe there is a better way to tell them about the hazard, about the risk. And I think that's the role of the NGO. They have a better experience with the community, much better than me as a scientist. So I can easily talk to this to the scientists as Dr. Kamaru, so I can explain everything. But the thing that I explain maybe will be translated into different language by the media. And then if you try to Googling my name, and then not all the news is a good one. So maybe some of them, so earthquake scientists from ATB told the media that the south coast of Java is very dangerous. I think that's not the point that I like to share with the peoples, but that's the thing that's written by the newspapers. Maybe then I need someone to translate my informations, and I think that's the role of the NGO. The NGO has, just like Mercy Malaysia, has a long experience with the local community, so they know better ways to share the knowledge. And I think this kind of lack of knowledge now is happening in Indonesia. So now we have, in my opinions, not only in ITB, in Gajah Mada University, University of Indonesia, and other universities in Indonesia, now the disaster research become more and more popular. But I think the second layers, the next layers, is the one who communicates our research into the government policy. I think we still need more and more people who translate our knowledge into decisions making process. I think, and that's a AHA center is very important. The NGO is very important. That's the role. And after that, the response. During the response, our capacity is very low. So my knowledge during the response is doing the observations, try to forecast what will be the next disaster. But maybe the needs of the government is not something like that. They need the information. They need us to help them with the food, with the with the medicines, with the waters, and so on. That's the thing that we cannot do. So, and we need to do collaborations with the NGO. So Pak Imran, so I'm looking forward to have a collaborations with Mercy Malaysia. Okay, let me continue with my slide first with the second topics, the seismic hazard of Indonesia. Well, why this topic is very important? Because maybe the reasons is I'm going to show you in these slides. This is the evolutions of the seismic hazard map of Indonesia. The first map Indonesia published in 1966. This is the map, the first seismic hazard map Indonesia, and we updated we revised the map in 1970, so 4 years after. But actually, the main map is the one that published in 1983. So this is the first official seismic hazard map that become the building codes of Indonesia. This is a very good map, but as you can see that the red colors mean a very high zone. So Indonesia divided into 6 zones, if I don't make mistakes. So from zone 1 to zone 6, I think from 1 and 3 is a very high risk, and 4 to 6 is a lower risk. So as you can see that Indonesian governments built many public facility after the 1983, after the oil booming in Indonesia. 70s, 80s, we have oil boomings, and we built so many facilities, including schools, roads, hospitals, and many critical facilities during the 18th and 90s. And most of the facilities built by using this code, the 1983 building codes. But if you see in detail, these building codes basically never put a very serious attention into the local active fault. For example, in west coast of Sumatra, they only put reds because of the subductions. We don't have any red areas in Java, only very small amounts, percentage in the western tips of Java Islands, but basically Java Islands considers to very safe place. And also Sulawesi Islands, we don't have any information about the what we call as a Palu Koro fault. So that's the reason why every big earthquakes that occurred in Indonesia, for example, the Lombok earthquakes that happens in 2018, many schools collapse, not only damage, but 100% damages. I found in one of the sub-districts, sub-district located in north of Lombok, no school still survives. Every school damages. The reason why the schools destroyed by the earthquakes, because most of the schools built by using this 1983 building codes. And this building code never put attention into the active fault, inland active fault, only subduction zone. So we revised this fault, we revised the map in 2002, but basically 2002 is the same as 1983. And only in 2010, we put a very serious attention into the active fault. If you ever heard the news about one of the iconic bridges in Palu that collapsed after the Palu earthquakes, the reason why the bridge collapsed because the bridge built before 2010. So the bridge built by using the older building codes that never considers the active fault. So that's a very serious reason. So we publish and since 2018, I think 2008. So I returned to Indonesia in 2008, and I joined this seismic hazard maps team, and we revise the Indonesian seismic hazard map, and we suggest to also put an active fault. So for the first time, we have what we call as a national Indonesian hazard maps. Hopefully this one is better than the previous one. But the problem is most of the school right now built during the periods of 80s and 90s, and most of them built using an old building code. And that's a very serious problem. Indonesia, most of the school built after the oil booms in Indonesia. But now we try to revise our seismic hazard map, and then the latest one is 2017. 2017 become a standard 2 years after, so it's become the National Building Code 2019. So now we have this kind of building codes right now. So we put so many new seismic sources. So we have several seismic sources in the subduction zones. Not only subduction zone, but we have many active faults. So we have now, I think, okay, maybe this slide better. So in the 2017 hazard map, we have 295 active faults. In the 2010 hazard maps, we have only 81 active faults. So we add more than 200 active faults. And now we are still working on additional active fault. For example, in Java Islands, we add more than 20 new active faults into the new seismic hazard map. So this hazard map become the standard 2 years after. So it's become 2019 National Seismic Hazard Maps of Indonesia. But now we are, this hazard map published in 2019, but now we already think that this new hazard map needs to be updated again because we found a new active fault. Even in Java Islands, we also found another 2 or 3 new active fault, and that will become additional active fault for the next revisions of the seismic hazard map of Indonesia. Okay, let me continue with the story about the Palu earthquake, the lesson that we can learn from the Palu earthquakes. Palu earthquakes, Palu area is a very good area for the multi-hazard research topics. I think this is very good area. I think this is one of the only area in Indonesia, maybe in the Southeast Asia, or maybe in the world, that we can study the multi-hazard, because we have a ground shakings, we have the tsunami, coastal slope failures, liquefactions, and surface fault ruptures at the same time. So it is very good region to test many method, many approach for the multi-hazard risk analysis. So actually now I'm having I have 2 PhD students working in these Palu areas, try to have a new methodology, try to establish a new methodology for the multi-hazards, because this is a very good area to study the multi-hazard risk analysis. But unfortunately, almost 5,000 people killed by these events, more than 60,000 household damages, more than 200,000 people displaced by these disasters. After the earthquakes, soon after the earthquakes, the local people felt very strong ground shakings. The strong ground shaking is 0.7 G. That's a very strong. With the, I think the intensity is around 9 to 10. Yeah, if we convert into the MMI, so it's a very strong shakings. And surface rupture is more than 2 meters, sometimes reach up to 5 meters. And so 3 minutes after the shaking, the tsunami came. Tsunami ran up heights from 6 to 11 meters. And arrival times only 3 minutes. So you can imagine only 3 minutes after the earthquake. So it's a very good area to test the near field tsunami warning system. We have a far field tsunami warning system, but the far field tsunami warning system based on the seismic observations, and the time is 5 minutes. So from the events into the warning, so we need so the Indonesian government has to announce to the people less than 5 minutes. But the problem with the tsunami comes only 3 minutes after the event. So we don't have any solution right now. How to warn the people? How to set up tsunami warning system for this kind of tsunami? So I think this is a very good area to test many new approaches, many new methods. And the second issue is liquefactions. In some reports said that 5 to 10 minutes after the earthquakes, or 2 to 7 minutes after the tsunami, we have a liquefactions. And the area of liquefaction is very huge, 180 hectares. It's very big. So it is 6 times bigger than my campus. It's very huge area. Okay, let me show the videos. Okay, I'm sorry, how the images. I think I have difficulty showing. Oops. Okay, okay, I get it. Okay, okay, maybe some of you already seen this one. This shows the scale of the liquefactions. So soon after these liquefactions, we did a survey with several geotechnical engineers from ITB, Professor Masyur Irsham, who has a very long relations research with many scientists, civil engineers from UTM, and also we did a survey together. Yeah, scientists from UTM also came help us to understand what is going on in Palu, and it's very hard to explain to see such a scale of such a massive disaster of the liquefaction. So I think it's very good research areas to understand what's going on in this area. And then and after the liquefactions, after the earthquakes, the tsunami, the surface ruptures, and the liquefactions, the social problems arise. For the first 3 days, the power went out completely. The power. So you can imagine 3 days no electricity. So I always imagine what will happen in my town Bandung if the powers cut off, let's say only for 3 hours. So my children will be very angry because they cannot connect to the internet, they cannot watch YouTube and so on. But in Palu for 3 days the power went out completely. For the first week, 65% recovers. So the rest 35% still black out. And for the next 2 weeks, 90% recovered after 2 weeks. So you can imagine, after 2 weeks, 90% recovers. And they had also problem with the water distributions because the distribution pipe networks destroyed by the very strong ground shaking. Disruption of gasoline distributions because the airport also collapsed, and also in some area the landslide blocked the roads, so disruptions of gasoline distributions. 90 ATMs are experiencing problems due to power failures. So you may imagine no electricity, no waters, no gasoline, and no money. So that's very serious social problems in Palu. And also the houses collapse, damage. So in terms of the tectonics, so this I tried to explain in the point of view of the earth science. So this fault, the Palu-Koro fault, accommodates the relative motion between what we call as Makassar block in the west and North Sula block in the east. So basically, many papers already mentions the danger of this fault. For example, the paper published in 1977. So actually, many scientists already suggest that this fault is very dangerous 40 years before the earthquakes. But it's very hard to convince the governments for something that they cannot imagine. So I think that's very important message about these earthquakes. So many papers already published, many findings, but actually how to bring this kind of the product of the research into the decision-making process, I think that's another research, I think. And in terms of the earthquake cycles, so the slip deficit is about 2 meters. And the last earthquake is 1968. So we already calculated that the return period of these earthquakes is 50 years. So it is very a textbook, I think. So the next 50 years after the 1968, after the 1968, the next big earthquakes will occur. And it happens. It's very simple strain accumulation and release process. But even that simple concept is very hard to understand by many people. I think the role of, I think we need collaborations, not only me as a earth scientist, but we need help from many stakeholders. And the displacements, the rupture length is 120 kilometers. Rupture duration is very fast. Yeah, rupture duration is very short, only 25 to 30 seconds. So you can imagine 130 kilos ruptures in only 30 seconds. So it is very fast ruptures. Since the rupture is very fast, so the shaking is very strong. And also these shakings alone may produce tsunami without any submarine landslide. So I think so many people, many scientists suggest this is what they call as super shear. This is very very strange phenomena in earthquakes, what we call as the super shear, because the normal velocity of the shear is only 2.6 from 2 to 2.6 kilometer per second, but this is doubles the normal the rupture of the normal earthquake. So that's the reason why scientists suggest these earthquakes as a super shear types of the earthquakes. And when we did the field survey, we can see a very clear offset. So offset more than 4.8 meters. So I went to the field, I think a week after, and we can see clearly the offset of the earthquakes horizontally, but not only horizontal, but we also the evidence of the vertical offset in the southern part of Palu. And also from our GPS observations, this is example of the GPS data. This is the offset. The locations of this site is very far. It is about 200 kilometers, the north of Palu, but still we detect a very significant displacement. Well, I'm going to skip this science part. I mean, the earth science part. I'm going to explain. I hope I still have time to explain the damage survey. So the rest of the earth science part maybe we can discuss later on. But I need to give more attention to share with all of you, because I need suggestions. That's the thing that we are not good at it. So I need more comment and suggestion from all the students and scientists who join this webinar. So we need what we call as damage survey. So I think we visited almost 400 locations. So we did a 5-day survey, and we did a questionnaire. We asked the peoples, and we also surveyed the damage. So what we try to explain here is, I think the red color shows the area of the heavily damages or destroyed area, for example, and the green one is no damage. The yellow one is destroyed, I think. So, but this blue or reds or greens color shows the area that we visited during our survey. And we tried to collect the data. So we tried to analyze the percentage of the damage, and we found that 40% of the houses that we visited are heavily damages, and 29% medium damages, something like this, and 23% slightly damaged, and only 8% damage. So this is actually, we don't have any detailed analysis for this data yet, and we also did some survey, and one of the questions, we have several questions, and one of the questions that we asked to the local people, including the local governments, the question is very simple. We try to gain the understanding, we try to gain the knowledge, we try to understand how, we try to understand, do they understand already, do they have a good knowledge about the earthquake, tsunami, and liquefactions before the disasters? So the question is, we asked the questions to them before September 2018. Did you know if an earthquakes, tsunami, and liquefactions could occur in Palu? So we try to understand whether they already good knowledge about the hazard before the disasters. And the answer is very interesting. So 95% said that not knowing at all. So they don't have any information about the liquefactions before the events. So they don't have any knowledge about the liquefactions before the liquefaction actually happens. And 85% said, so 85% said that they don't have any knowledge about tsunami. So 95% said they don't have any information about the liquefactions. 84, they don't have any knowledge about the tsunami, and 71% said they don't have any, they know nothing about earthquakes. And to who already understand about liquefaction, tsunami, and earthquakes, we try to ask more in detail where they learn about the earthquake, tsunami, and liquefaction. And they said they learn from the media. So 2% of them said they learn from the media. So media is very important source of the informations. And only 2% learn from school. So I think this is, maybe we need to have a better methodology for the survey. We need to have more data, but at least from our survey conducted last year, we found that only 2% learn from school. And in average, 8% hear stories of a past disaster. Because in 1968, the same earthquake and tsunami occurred in Palu. So some of them, maybe senior citizens already, they share their knowledge to the son or the grandson. They told them about the story of the past disasters. And 16% experienced before. So I think it is, the data is very surprising for us, because the rule of the formal educations is very low compared to their own experience or the story from the elderly about this disaster. I think, but of course we need to elaborate more this finding. I'm still working on this part, and of course we need a comment and suggestions from many scientists from Malaysia regarding this finding. And this is a conclusion for my talk. This conclusion, but this is based on my own perspective as earth scientist, as a geoscientist. learning from the disasters in Indonesia, we still have uncertainty in the earthquakes models. So we need to update our knowledge about the earthquake sources in Indonesia. As I mentioned that most of buildings Indonesia, most of the critical infrastructures, including school, hospitals built during 80s and 90s, and most of them built by using the old standards. And the second issue related with, we still have an uncertainty in tsunami generations. The source of the tsunami, for example, after the Palu earthquakes, we have another tsunami in January 2019. The locations of the tsunami in the western part of Java Islands, and the tsunami caused by volcanic eruptions. So having a very good understanding of the tsunami generations will give us a better understanding in the way we operate the warning system. And up to now, we still have no adequate multi-hazard risk models. I think that's a very good, the Palu earthquake is a very good research field if we want to build good multi-hazard risk models. Because if we don't have a good multi-hazard risk model, then we may have uncertain context for mitigations and recovery. I think that's all for my talks today. Thank you for your patience. I think 90 minutes talk is very hard to concentrate. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Kamaru,
Yes,
please allow me to answer the questions.
please feel
Okay.
free.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Irwan. Waalaikumsalam. I'm Nurul. Thank you for information. Implementations of building code is one of the mitigation strategies for earthquake event. How do the governments in Indonesia work on it, and how the acceptance of the people? Well, yes, I think you, Ms. Nurul Azima, you pointed out very important issues, yeah, regarding the building codes. I think having a good building code is very important. And now the building code become what we call as SNI, Indonesian National Standard. So Indonesia, we have, I think the same in other countries as well. We have a national standard for the helmet, and then now we have the national standard for the buildings. And but this is the but the standard for buildings up to now only for the high-rise building only for the high-rise building. So if you, if you visit Jakarta and if you stay in the 4 stories hotels, most of the hotels for higher than 4 stories, they have to adopt this building code. But for the housing, it is not implemented yet. It is the acceptance of, you mentioned the acceptance of the people is still, some of them already understand the necessity of this one, but most of them, they have their own ways in buildings, their own houses. So to answer, in short, to answer your question is, what we try to do right now, we try to convince the government. So the government of Jakarta already accept our proposal, and they said, okay, that for all the high-rise building, higher than 4 stories, they need to follow the standard. But maybe not now, maybe for the next 5 years, then all the housings in Jakarta maybe will follow this one. So they try to implement this standard gradually. And now in Bandung, it's already, Bandung and Surabaya city, they gradually try to follow the standard, but they start from the high-rise buildings, not for the housings. But actually, at the point of view of scientists, we really hope that the critical infrastructure built by the government needs to follow this standard. So we really hope in the future the critical infrastructures, including school, hospitals, need to follow this standard. So we need to have collaborations with the local NGO to push our government. Sometimes it will be easier if the voice not come from only from university, but from other sides, maybe they may speak louder than us. I hope I answer your questions, Ms. Nurul Azima. And the next questions from Dayang. I read about Peta Bencana, Indonesia early warning system utilizing social media platform. How is the usage among rural peoples? Do they get to use it? Well, I'm not familiar with the Peta Bencana. I mean, but in my opinions, any means of sharing information about the warning system is very important. Using social media is one of the good ways to share the information about the warnings. But the problem with the country of Indonesia, for example, I think in 1916 or 17, I had a small research in one of the islands, we call it Mentawai Islands. In that area, it's very hard to get the electric power. So they only have electric powers after 7 p.m. So I think they only have the electric power for 12 hours only, from 7 to 7. So, and after that, no powers. So it's very hard to imagine to share the information by using the social media platform in the regions. For big city, it must be okay to share to utilizing social media platform. But for the small islands, I think it's not easy to use to utilize the social media platform. So we need to have several methods in order to share the warnings, not only the utilizing social media platform, but maybe using a traditional system. In Indonesia, we call a kentongan. I don't know in Malaysia, but by hitting a bamboo kind of warning system. So it works in some areas. On the flank of the Merapi volcano, for example, they use the bamboo system using the kentongan. They hit the kentongan. If they hit long, meaning that eruptions, if they hit different tone, then different kind of hazard and so on. So I think we need to utilize different means of warning systems, not only social media. Social media is okay and it's very powerful, especially especially among young generations. And the second questions from Ms. Sajliana, how does the authority deals with trauma to tsunami victim and rebuild their life since Indonesia from, okay. Yes, this is a very serious issue. And as I mentioned earlier, in our university, we don't have faculty of psychology. We don't have a kind of that faculty. So when we go to the fields, we need to collaborate with other university to have, especially the children's from the traumatic events of the earthquakes and tsunami. But recently we use science and art. You use the arts, yeah. So we ask them to draw something. We have one of the experts who utilize art for trauma healings. But to answer your questions, the authority, yes, of course, the authority, the BNPB, the National Disaster Management Agency, they have their own sections who deals with the trauma healings after the tsunami. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that the scale of disaster is so huge, yeah. So sometimes that, for example, now we have a very serious problem with the volcanic eruptions in Sinabung volcano. Sinabung is located in the north of Sumatra. And the problem with this Sinabung volcano, this volcano has been erupting since 2010. So now it has been more than 10 years. So we need to concentrate into that volcanoes. But while we are doing trauma healing in that volcanoes, another volcano erupt. For example, Merapi volcano. Then we need to do something with that volcano. And a few days after, we have another problems, the earthquakes and the tsunami, landslide, and so on. So it is now it's become obligations, not only the authority, but also the local university needs to help them with all this kind of respond, not only the research, but also the trauma healings, respond to trauma healings. And I think one of the, based on my experience, the capacity of each university is different, yeah. So that's, I think, one of the serious issues, yeah. Having such kind of having this kind of collaboration is very important. One university is strong in this area, but they have no experience in different areas. So having kind of collaboration is very important. And let me continue to the next questions. Okay. The questions from Mr. Azhar. Indonesia often experience major disaster. How policies or any new strategy in the governments for concentrating in disaster management regarding agencies that focus on future disaster? Well, it is very good questions, and also it's very hard to answer questions. To be honest, yeah, but as a scientist, we think that disaster is not a major issue for the governments right now. Since we have so many problems, not only disaster, they said, we have economics issue, basic infrastructure issue, and so on and so on. So disaster is not the most important topics, I can say like that. And also as a scientist, I cannot say to government, well, government, disaster is very important. Please make us the most important topics. I cannot say like that, because I do understand that there are so many problems. But what we can do is we do our best in our field, and we do our best to convince them to put attention. We always said to the government, please make investigations into disaster risk reductions. Because if you spend right now into better building codes, into a good research, then in the futures, the economic loss due to disaster will become less. But it's hard to explain. I mean, I don't know in Malaysia, but we get a very serious attention from government after a big disaster. So after the Palu earthquakes, after the Yogyakarta earthquakes 2006, and so on, we get attention from them. But years after, probably another problems come, and they think that, okay, maybe this year this is not our priority anymore. Let's move into another important issues, for example. So I think, well, you pointed out very important question, the strategy. Now we try to, at least as a scientist, I try to approach the governments, the disaster mitigation agency. I try to approach Ministry of Education, and recently I have a very good conversation with Ministry of Finance. Why Ministry of Finance? Because they understand that if disaster happens, they have the obligations to help the people. They need to spend the money, and they understand they lost a lot of money after disaster. So the main questions they ask to me as a scientist, is it possible in the future that the budget from the government for disaster become less? And I said, of course it is possible. How come? Please spend, maybe let's say, as I mentioned earlier, so almost annually, the Ministry of Finance needs to spend 1.6 billion US dollars for every disaster, every year's flood and so on. And it's surely every year they have to spend such money. Some years they spend more. And they said, and I said to them, please send at least 1% from 1.6 billion of your money, at least 1% for research and another 1% to strengthen the infrastructures, doing the retrofittings of every major schools and hospitals. And I believe this small investment will become something important in the future. So it is very easy to give them a perspective in terms of the financial loss, because it has affected them a lot. And I don't know, maybe some people have different strategy, but me as a scientist, I try to show them that we as a scientist is part of the solutions. And then we may save your money. Money is the easiest language they can understand. So dollars is the easiest language. So if you spend only 1% from 1.8 billion, then that you spend annually, just spend, but you have to spend it before the disaster. And I can make sure that in the futures, the money that you have to spend after the disaster will be less. So I think that's the thing that, of course, the government has their own strategy by using education and so on and so on. But I think the most easiest way, based on my experience for the last 20 years, is just try to convince them in terms of the financial effect of disaster. They will say, oh, okay, so you are doing something that very beneficial to the country. I said, oh, okay, thank you very much. But actually, our research is very important in terms of the humanity. But I mean, the easiest way is to speak by using the language of money. Well, I don't know. I can tell you more about this. For example, we proposed the disaster risk financing strategy to the Ministry of Finance, including the insurance and so on. So now I'm working closely with them, besides with the disaster management agency and the local governments. But now we try to propose the disaster risk financing strategy, including the strategy of the insurance. I don't know that the disaster insurance is already part of the Malaysian government plans or not. But since last year, the Indonesian government approved the idea of disaster risk financing. the insurance for the governmental office, governmental buildings. Since last year, maybe we'll move to another type of buildings. Okay, besides education and so on and so on. Okay, the next question from Ms. Nur Yahzehan. Since Indonesia is very prone to earthquake and tsunami, what do you find the most effective countermeasures to prepare the local for future earthquake tsunamis? Okay, Ms. Zehan, I think your question is very important, and I often during the field works that's a very good timing for me to stop myself from many administrative and research activities, just thinking deeply, contemplating and so on. So doing field work is very important, and having discussion with the local people also is very important. So for the local people, for the future earthquakes and tsunami, the most important, in my opinions, the first one is we need to understand the source, and that's the duty of us as scientists. But the risk models, in my opinions, is a part of conversations between the scientists, the government, and the local people. So the risk models. So of course we have our methodology to produce the risk functions of a hazard, vulnerability, and capacity, and so on and so on. But the most effective risk models is a product of discussions among scientists, local governments, and the local peoples. Why we need to include the local people? Because they have their own knowledge. Based on my experience, if I go to the field and as a scientist with the 20 years experience, so I have some knowledge I'd like to share with the local peoples. But when I meet them, actually they give the knowledge to me. They have their own knowledge already, and that's very good. They tell us many things, the story in the past and so on, the local wisdom and so on. And I'm very fascinated by different kind of knowledge they have. And I cannot say that my knowledge is the only correct approach in producing risk. So risk is a product of negotiations among scientists, of course, and also local governments, and also local people, because risk is a perception. We can produce a good risk map with very good colors, colorful, and so on. But if the local people said, I don't want to use this map, or the government say, oh no, this map is only for you, for scientists, not for us, for government, then our risk map will not become a solution. So that's based on my experience. So of course, so that's the reason why I have a very strong interest into the social science. Although I'm not a social scientist, but in my opinions, the people has their own textbook, which is different from us. And in order to make our knowledge read the textbook as well. And I think that's a very important part of gaining the knowledge, I think. And that's my opinions. Okay, the next questions from Khairi. Just now you mentioned regarding the low resilience regarding earthquakes among the youth. In your observations, experience, how is resilience of the healthcare workers toward earthquake disaster, especially in preparing and giving response during earthquakes disaster? Okay. resilience among the healthcare workers. Yeah. Well, I have based on my experience, one of my best friends during disaster is always the healthcare workers, because I don't have the special skills. Yeah, and we need them to respond many things. Yeah, to respond during the emergency, and based on my observations during every disaster is they have very good knowledge. They are very resilient, but some of the buildings are not. Some of the hospital, especially small hospitals, they don't have a good system for the emergency, backup powers and so on, for example, evacuation route, for example. So I think in terms of the personal skill, the healthcare workers generally are very reliable, very resilient, but not the infrastructures. So I think one of the homeworks for us is to have a better infrastructures for the healthcare workers. So I think that's the thing that we need to upgrade. Okay, let me continue to the next question. I hope you answered your questions. From Mr. Ramzani from Department of Minerals and Geoscience. On the seismic sources during Lombok, is it the first time in history the aftershock method is bigger than main shock? In that case, any new research method have been done to identify? Well, actually, it is not. It is not the first one. For example, in the okay, I'm sorry. For example, during the 2007 Bengkulu earthquakes, we have a magnitude 7.4 a weeks before 7.9. So it is not the only example of one earthquake followed by bigger earthquake. This is not the only example. But the problem is 7.4 is already big enough. So we can easily say that 7.4 is the main shocks that will follow by aftershock with magnitude smaller than 7.4. But actually, a week after we have 7.9, bigger than. So the question is, how can we identify that this kind of earthquakes will be followed by aftershock or by main shock? So that's I think that's the main problems that we need to solve. And now we already come up with the conclusion based on Lombok earthquakes. What we try to identify is the maximum credible earthquakes in the regions. For example, now we find out the maximum credible earthquakes for Lombok is 7.2. So if the earthquake in 6.5, then there is a big possibility having another big earthquakes after this one. Why we can say that? Because based on our research, the maximum credible earthquakes, the maximum probable earthquakes for that region is not 6.5, but 7.2. If the earthquake is 6.5, then we need to have a better understanding why only 6.5. Probably in the next futures, the next future means next a few days, next week, or next few months, another earthquakes will occur. So that's one way to solve such a problems, is to calculate what we call is maximum credible earthquakes in one seismic seismogenic zone in one segment. For example, now we divided into several segments, and if the earthquakes occurred with magnitude lower than the maximum expected or maximum probable magnitude in the regions, then probably the next event will be bigger than the previous one. So that's the strategy now that we try to implement in some seismogenic area. Okay, the next question is from Mr. Arifin Gafar. Earthquake disaster causes a mass destructive. I think this one will be the last question because it's already 5 p.m. Malaysian times. Some previous study mentions the important role of hospital resilience in response to post-earthquakes event. Can you share your opinion okay, GIS application? Well, I'm relying on GIS actually. If I have another opportunity, I will show you the locations of all. I have a map of all what we call as Puskesmas. Puskesmas is center of healthcare center for community healthcare centers in Indonesia, and also all the locations of the hospital in Indonesia, and how actually they are very prone to the earthquakes, and some of them are not resilient enough to in terms of the infrastructures, not resilient enough for disaster. And I'm using GIS for this kind of analysis, and I hope I answer most of the questions. I'm very sorry I cannot answer all the questions, and I really hope this is not our last discussions. I very hope in the futures, Dr. Kamaru, we may have a time to have more discussion again. Thank you for your kind attention.
Yes, Dr. Irwan, thank you very much. I think we can have additional time. Well, I think it's unfair for them, for those who already putting some effort to perhaps getting some feedback from you. Yeah, if you don't mind, there are 6 more. If you can make it short, at least address the important one which may not be addressed in the previous questions. There are a few questions I think relevant for today's topic. Dr. Irwan, please.
I will. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kamaru. Okay, I will continue the questions from Ms. Siti Rafida. Okay, with the new Indonesian capital is going to move to Kalimantan. That's a very good question. Will the new Indonesian capital plans adapt the new buildings code? Well, I really hope so. Yeah, I really hope so. They will adapt the new building codes. I really hope so. But one of the issue, not only earthquakes, yeah, actually in terms of the earthquakes, the area is not as dangerous as another part of Indonesia. But in terms of the tsunami, we need to study more, and also flood actually. Yeah. Okay, the next questions from Felicity. Yep. I'd like to know whether local government is in Indonesia empowered community at risk to be resilient toward the multi-hazard environments. Okay. That's the second question is very important. How does the COVID-19 pandemic impact the multi-hazard? Okay. Well, yes, the Indonesian local governments now try to empower the community at risk. Yeah. We have, for example, in Indonesia, we call it is Desa Siaga Bencana, Disaster Resilience Village. That's Komunitas Siaga Bencana, Disaster Resilience Community, for example. Yeah, and this kind of community empowers by the local governments. But it's, as I mentioned earlier, based on my experience, DRR now become a hot issue in Indonesia. Yeah. Mitigation has become a very hot jargon in Indonesia. But the problem is, some of them or many of them don't really understand the hazard itself. And I think that's the role of the scientists. So mitigation, but if I ask the questions, how about the hazard? Do you understand about the earthquakes, the possibility of having earthquakes in regions? So I think many of them, not only the local people, probably the local government also still hard to answer that questions. Yeah. So I think to answer your question, yes, because we have a community scale disaster resilience. And to answer your questions, how to respond during pandemic? During the pandemic, we already have one experience, the Majene earthquakes, January 2021. So the earthquakes happen during the pandemics, and that's make the response very difficult. Yeah, that makes the response is much more difficult. And I cannot imagine if the disaster with the scale or Lombok or Palu occurred during this period. I really hope it will not happen. But if it happens during the period, as you, maybe if you are aware now that the numbers of the COVID victims now in Indonesia is more than 30,000 daily cases. Yeah, daily case is more than 30,000. So I cannot imagine that maybe, I don't know how to, me myself, I cannot go for the field work for sure. Yeah, usually a few days after we go for the field, we set up instrument, we ask for help from our friends in the government, in the local peoples, and so on, go to the field helping them. But no, I will not go anywhere. I will stay at home. But how about them? So to answer your questions, personally, I don't have any information how to deal, how to help, and how to do the survey during this pandemics. I don't know. I'm very sorry. I don't have the answer for that yet. Okay, let me continue with the questions from Mr. Saiful. You mentioned about the importance to highlight the active fault in the hazard map. In Peninsula Malaysia, there are no volcano system, but there are many major faults that have been delimited by the geological map. There are also hot spring that has been particular. In your opinion, is there any possibility that the fault is okay? Yes. To answer your questions, well, for example, in Kalimantan, we have an active fault in Kalimantan, yeah. But not in the scale active fault that we have in Sumatra or in Sulawesi. So it doesn't have to be major active fault. Majors in Indonesia means the active fault bigger than 6.5. But even with the active fault that produce an earthquakes with magnitude 3, 4, or 5 need to be identified. And I think in Malaysia Peninsula, I think there is a big possibility they are an active fault that capable to produce earthquakes with magnitude 6, 4, or 5, in my opinions. Maybe not 6, 3, 4 to 5. I have one experience in 2010 in Lembang Fault, the north of Bandung. There was an earthquake with magnitude 3.4, but 100 houses collapsed. The reason why 100 houses collapsed because the locations of the fault just below the housing area. So even only 3.4, but if it is located very near to the infrastructures, there is high possibility some infrastructure will be affected by those earthquakes. So I think it is very important to identify an active fault in Malaysia Peninsula, but usually me myself has a long debate with some geologists because identifying an active fault is a multidisciplinary approach. It's it's not something that can only identified by geologists. We need also a point of view from geodesists who also install the GPS data to understand the terrain map in the regions. We also need an opinion for the seismologists to detect the small earthquakes with magnitude smaller than 1, for example. So it's so having alignment of the fault is okay. That's one step. But the next step is to answer very basic questions. How active is an active fault? We cannot say it is active. But the most important question is, how active is that active fault? You need to answer very basic questions. What is the maximum magnitude of that fault? What is the maximum credible earthquakes of that fault? And how about the slip rate? How about the return period of that fault? So we cannot just say this is the line fault. No, it's not something like that. But we need to answer very basic questions. The maximum magnitude, the return period, and the slip rate. Then we can do the probabilistic seismic hazard analysis. Okay, I hope I answer your questions. And the next question from Miss Aisa. If there is sufficient early warning system or any geospatial technology that exists before Palu earthquakes occur, there is possibility that more people can be saved. The answer is yes. If we have sufficient warning system, the time is 3 minutes, only 3 minutes, but we need to have a local warning system. What we have right now is centralized warning system. So the warnings come from the national governments, from Jakarta, and sent to the local people, and that takes time. They said they guarantee they can send the warning less than 5 minutes, but some of the tsunami come earlier than 3 minutes. I saw one video showing a car crossing, move along the coastlines. If only they have knowledge after the earthquakes, the system, the local system, I believe they will stop for a while. They will not cross the coast. They will not go along the coastline, and I believe many people will be safe. But since they have any knowledge, since there is no warning whatsoever, so that's the reason why after the earthquakes, some people still do the routine activities. So we have 180 seconds golden times after. It is very short, sure, but I believe during that very short, some people can be safe. So I think we need to I need to work harder yeah, of course, scientists are also guilty. We don't have I always hope that I have a better knowledge, so I can save them. So I can, if I do my job better, I believe many people can be safe. Okay. Okay, thank you for the tsunami that occurred in Palu was also caused by submarine landslide that caused by a tsunami to reach Palu. Okay, as a result of the Palu tsunami, does BNPG now consider numerical modeling as a means of forecasting future tsunami? Okay, yes, of course, they use the numerical modelings. Actually, they use pre-calculated. Yeah, so they have, so they pre-calculated all the tsunamis. So when one earthquake happens, they just try to dig from the database and try to see these earthquakes match with which type of database pre-calculated tsunami, so they can say that, okay, this one will produce this hike of the tsunamis. That's the idea, but I think one of the problem is, and this problem is not, it is not only the problems in Indonesia. I think this is problem of most of the South Asian countries. We need to understand a local tsunamis better, because many scientists who publish tsunami also, they always assuming that they have a kind of far field tsunamis, but now we need to consider the near field tsunamis. I hope I answer your questions. Okay, the next questions. Is it can mega quake really happens like magnitude 10s or larger? As I understand, largest magnitude. Okay, very good questions. Is it possible to have an earthquake with magnitude 6.5, for example? Well, it is possible, but the possibility is very low, I think. Assuming, for example, subduction zone in the south of Java, the length of subduction zone is almost 1,000 kilos. And assuming that, and we divide the 1,000 kilos subduction zone in the south of Java, we divide it into 3 segments. So divide it into 3 segments. In each segment produce 8.5, 8.5, and 8.5. And if we combine all 3 segments structure at the same time, the maximum magnitude is 9.1. So I think in the case of Indonesia, it is not the possibility of having magnitude bigger than 9.1 is very small. I think that's to answer your questions. Can you please share a strategic plan to retrofit buildings construction without considering seismic design, for example, prioritizing the passing critical building? Well, retrofitting is now a very hot issue in Indonesia, and sometimes it's very hard to have the as-built drawings, maps, as-built drawings designed for that building. But what our engineers do usually, we try to calculate the existing buildings. They have a way to, for example, calculate all the steels and so on. From the structural engineer's point of view, they try to calculate the existing strength of that building and try to compare with all the code. So then they will come up with a suggestion whether this building need to retrofit or not. Of course, we do that now, and we do now analysis for several critical infrastructure. For example, near our campus, near ITB, we have a small nuclear power plants for the research purposes. It is a small, but there is a nuclear power plant, even a very small. And that nuclear power plant built during the 1890s, as I mentioned earlier, before we published a new building code. So we suggest them to retrofit the buildings, and now they are doing retrofitting for the buildings. And we also made suggestions to several critical infrastructures. I hope I answer your questions. Dr. Kamaru, I really hope I already answered all the questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes. I think well, that's it. If we open another cycle of the questions, it will come like a tsunami, Dr. Irwan. Yeah. So so many interesting topics, fact and figure, the evidence that you shown today mark the importance of research and how we can translate research into practice. We can convince the stakeholders, disaster managers, policymakers based on the scientific based evidence for them to make right decisions. And I would like to take a couple of a point here to be addressed. I think you have made some remarkable point here. I think if I could, you mentioned that risk is a result of negotiation. Is a perceptions, so it's not belong to one particular field or disciplinaries, that also shows our commitments coming from a different stakeholders, from a different sectorals and expertise. I'm quite happy to hear the first remarks that you mentioned in your talk. And the second point, you mentioned about how actually the investments is not only on the mitigation, but also on the understanding of the hazard, the level of exposure, the spatial probability, temporal probability of that particular event. And some sense, at one hand, people are easily see this geological hazard or disaster induced as part of making a profit. That's why mitigation is always fancy, but actually they don't have enough information to rightly or timely invest in that particular point. And you mentioned about this about almost 30% increment of the 2010 to 2017 seismic hazard. This is something interesting to pointing out, Dr. Irwan. And I think from the questions as well, the students have raised from a different angle and perspective of the earthquakes. Yeah. So I do hope that the topic can be picked up by our young generations. Of course, you still young, and yet very capable to handle this. And given the fact that the economic losses due to earthquake, well, I would say earthquake is the first disaster in terms of the ranking, and you spend about 1.6 billion USD per year. So I could imagine if we can pick up 10% or 1%, 0.1% pre-investments on the preventive, how much basically we can save the people life and perhaps protect the critical infrastructures. I think you have made a right point here, investing more on the preventive. And given the statistic from the Palu, I was well, it was surprise to some of us, given the fact that it's a 50 years return period, but still we have seen the amount of effort on the education, transmitting our local knowledge, traditional knowledge into the formal education is still low. So I think that's also something that we can pick it up on the Malaysia context. Say, for example, the Sabah earthquakes also, we are talking about 50 to 100 years return period. There's so many debates, and we also predict for another earthquakes in less than 30 years return period. So I think there are certain element where we can utilize the science-based evidence decision making for making a good action. Yeah. And on the another hand, I wish that today we have seen some significant effort by the academicians, scientists, and researchers who are channeling some of the evidence to the right channel. Yeah. And you mentioned about the multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach perhaps helps in the process of that particular time, these golden hours per se. We need to properly indicate where are the next potential hit of the earthquakes, post earthquake, for example. And given the fact that these back to back, 2018 Sulawesi earthquake in September and Palu earthquake, it was surprised to see how actually the Indonesian governments recover. Of course, there are some hiccup, but compared to the last 20, 30 years of response, I think there are significant improvements. And I do believe that with a new seismic hazard produced, or that would be going to be reproduced based on the new fault line, new active faults information, you may better invest in the building codes, in the proper mitigation preparedness programs, and we can increase the level of awareness at the young generation. So, well, we have about 6 minutes to go. I would like to perhaps conclude, Dr. Irwan, by saying that let's take this as a positive way, how we can leverage your knowledge, your network, your so-called well, we have a living lab, you know. I'm so sorry to say that it's a living lab. So let's learn from the past. Let's use a clue, given the fact that we have to learn from there and make a right move. You know, maybe Malaysia can be considered as a safe zones in the past, but now it's not that the case. Yeah, um, taking into account some of the new active faults found in the peninsular Malaysia, and we also worried about the regional seismotectonic that may trigger some of the inactive or dormant faults as well. And I like to highlight as well some remarks that you mentioned, that identifying these active faults is a multidisciplinary by itself. You know, it's not dedicated to one particular field. I do agree, but at a certain point, you know, we still have this barrier. But how to break the barrier, I think bringing your team into the Malaysian context, that's one way or another to convince the some of the active player in Malaysia. But I think it's good to mention here that tomorrow afternoon we are going to discuss at the national level together. Well, it's coordinated by SEGRM. Is a professional association together with Department of Mineral and Geoscience to see this seismic hazard in Malaysia. I think your presentations today, our discussions, gave huge impact, of course, for tomorrow's Dr. Irwan. I really appreciate, and in fact, some of our colleagues at the professional bodies associations already convey message, why don't we invite you to come? But well, I do understand your commitments as administrator. I'm also one of the administrator in my field, in my university. But you know, our effort, how we put our passion in this field, make us difference, I would say. How we treat the field informations, how we observe by our own eyes. You know, seen by yourself might be different as you imagine, as we heard from somebody else. And well, I have a long notes here, Dr. Irwan, and we have about 2 minutes before we end. Once again, we would like to extend our collaborations, partnerships, cooperations in this relative field, and hopefully one day we can also bring our students, our scientists, professionals to Indonesia. We can have like summer programs, you know, or like study trips where we can see by ourselves this Palu area. As as you mentioned, is one of the perfect place for the multi-hazard related research, yeah, coming from the ground shaking, tsunami, liquefaction, surface rupture. I'm absolutely exciting to visit this area one day, Dr. Irwan. Yes, we come to the end of the session, but once again, this not the one-off session. There's gonna be a series of discussion follow up session, and I do believe that the postgraduate students of MDRM benefit a lot, Dr. Irwan. To put all these 20 years within 2 hours, I think it's not enough, definitely. But some of the advice, recommendation, suggestion for the future work, future research, we take note, and we will come back to you, and maybe through this UTM, ITB, your center, and DPPC center can provide another set of collaboration in this disaster risk reduction field, Dr. Irwan. So on behalf of UTM, we would like to thank your commitments, time, and energy. And of course, on behalf of UTM as well, we would like to convey some of the message from many partners, strategic partners, that gonna be a series of follow-ups, Dr. Irwan. Yeah, I think, shall we take a group photos? I think I would like to call all the MDRM students. They are in fact coming from a different perspective, different field, and also background, Dr. Irwan. Megan, can you help me? And Firdaus, can you help me to take a photos, give a good clue? And we had also an event this morning, and this is a back-to-back in a single day. But I am happy that you can make it, Dr. Irwan. Firdaus, Megan, are you ready for the
Yes.
group photos?
Okay,
Yeah,
ready?
smile.
1, 2, 3. Okay, can we give thumbs up? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Irwan. Once
My
again,
pleasure.
we are so excited and to know more about it, and hopefully, I think the students also have your contact, and I hope that we can extend another set of collaboration in this field. Yeah. So maybe last word from the MDRM groups. Maybe Dr. Khairi, please. Thank notes to Dr. Irwan on behalf of your batch, please, Dr. Irwan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi, Dr. Irwan.
Waalaikumsalam.
So like to thank you for the knowledge that you given to us, and we hope that it will be useful for us in the future in this field of disaster risk management. Thank you, Doctor.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you. And of course, Imran, I think it's look like you have something to say, please, if you wish. Okay. And maybe Yap on behalf of the ladies or someone from the
Hi,
ladies group, please.
Dr. Irwan. I'm Yap, representing the students. I would like to thank you for the very informative sharing session. I think we learned a lot and we get a lots of new knowledge. And then looking forward for next session, sharing sessions or follow-up sessions. We still need to learn a lot from Indonesia. Yeah, that's all from me. Thanks.
Yes, with that, I think we end the session. Once again, thank you, Dr. Irwan, for your remarkable presentation and sharing. And to all students, thank you for your time and commitments. To all participants that join us through Facebook Live, I would like to thanks again for your time and also your cooperation. Of course, those who submitted the questions, we will compile, and the rest of the discussion point will be also gathered. So So hopefully these kind of webinar, the platforms can be also organized in the near future. With that, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum and have a great day. Stay safe everyone and enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Terima kasih
Thank
Pak
you very
Irwan.
much.
Terima kasih Dr. Irwan.
Terima kasih Dr. Irwan.
Terima kasih Bapak. Salam dari Indonesia.